Mujeeb's son, along with a well-known celebrity lineup you can see, were launching this film and were being promoted as the people behind the film, as people who were controlling the film. As a journalist, I asked a question. I said, how come? Reza had also, I started to discover, started buying very expensive properties. One of the fanciest mansions in Beverly Hills, one of the most expensive flats in New York, and later around a very expensive townhouse in London. How come? I mean, he'd been a junior bank for 2 years. He was being written up in the Hollywood press as somebody who had a major financial background. But that was through. And when I started asking those questions, wow, you get the legal letters, don't you? You get the very angry responses. But then when they can't follow those up, they've got a problem. So you just have to keep digging. Once you know you've got a story, once you know they've got a problem, once you know something's going on, worry the bone. That's the tip. I worried the bone, and I found out that Jolo had been investing in an attempt to buy out London's expensive hotel chain. And handily, a court judgment had shown that he'd been using 1MDB as his backer. Now, at that point, I'd caught them on a lie, because Jolo had been starting to make statements that he'd actually had nothing to do with 1MDB beyond some early stages. So then you get to a stage where, you probe, you ask questions, you get statements, and then you can prove they lied. There was a court judgment that showed that he'd lied. He was up to his neck in using 1MDB as a backer for major private enterprise, so-called private enterprise activities. So again, now you've got them on the run, and you've just got to stand your ground. So at this point, you've got them on the run. Never underestimate. I've never had a successful investigation without key source. In the end, it's the insiders who are going to help you out. And one of the things that you burrow around. This is Xavier Justo, and Xavier is in jail right now, unfortunately, in Thailand, which was the wrong place to be if you're a major whistleblower in a case in Malaysia. And they've managed to get their hands on him and get him in jail on trumped-up charges. Sources are everything to a journalist, to an investigative journalist. And one of the things that I found with this investigation and with other investigations is if you put yourself out there, if you start on a story, if you start investigating, often those sources will come to you. And many, many sources have come to me. Always take them seriously. Always listen to what they say. You have to corroborate. You have to work. Nothing, no data check or anything beats an inside source. Another source provided me with the bank details, the inside bank details of Prime Minister Najib Razak's ANZ bank account in KL. And of course, that was a story I would never have got if I hadn't worked my sources and got that information out. And as a journalist, you're always working with other people who don't come out into the light, who are usually very brave and usually motivated by a wish to do right. I'm racing a bit, but this was the second stage of the 1MDB scandal. The first had $1 billion of the missing 1MDB money had gone into his private bank accounts and then on into his various investments. Again, you cannot do this unless you're working with people who know from the inside, generally. I'm just bringing in one picture of a naughty banker there. A bit of a celebrity banker was Tim Leisner. Big cheese at Goldman Sachs, number one in Asia, Southeast Asia by the time he got sacked. with his very famous model wife, apparently. She's very famous, Kimora Lee Simmons, American lady. Now, he's one of the many, many bankers that decided that if you're dealing with governments, then they have impunity, and so you just, you're going to be able to get away with all this. There are numerous bankers now who are being investigated, and he has had to leave his position at Goldman Sachs, having thought that this was all going to be something that could be handled. And in the course of this story, again, the tip is, follow the story, keep probing, look at everyone who's involved. I started criticizing banks who were obviously involved, institutions, individuals. What were accountants doing, passing accounts for 1MDB when they were supposed to be international respected accountancy firms? Why was Goldman doing massive multi-million dollar deals with 1MDB when there were so many question marks over the objective of the money, where it went? There was low transparency. The bonds were being raised offshore. I just kept asking questions, and also, pointing out the very many aspects that a scandal like this throws off. You keep probing, you keep pointing out who's doing what perhaps they shouldn't be doing. Just as a final point, one of the many wonderful and brave people who in Malaysia was kidnapped and was found in this barrel. He made a huge sacrifice, and he was standing up for what he thought was important for his country. To us, find out things that the head of their country doesn't want to know. They will come public number one. You, I guess, have to be prepared and ready at a very early stage to face a very, very vigorous, angry, and dangerous response. And I know you're all investigative journalists, so you know about the problems, but keep your security, be ready in advance, assume that you're going to be subject to all sorts of legal and illegal attempts to stop your work, and that this will extend to the people that you've worked with. And I think on that sad note, I will pass on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Okay, so there you have it, the story behind 1MDB. So, if I recall, I think the most important key is keep asking questions. And Claire, before the 1MDB project, 1MDB story, has been writing many stories before that, exposing corruption in Sarawak mostly, and that plays a big part on lay the foundation that lead her to exposing this big scandal. And when I first asked Claire, what is your most important tips for investigative journalists exposing corruption? And she said, most of investigative journalists has brain and determination, and sometimes we just forgot how to use them. So that's being said, now we move on to our second panelist, Carol Ilagan. She'll guide us through the tips and methods on how PCIJ first broke the Estrada story, Mausen, and also the Arroyo corruption case. 1 minute for
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and also honored to be part of the panel and also to be able to share PCIJ's story. At the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, where I work, we value these opportunities for us to share, but also learn from the experiences of our neighbors. And we take this to heart because we know that press freedom is a very fragile creature in many countries in our part of the world. So we know that part of understanding our work, we also need to have a nuanced understanding of our situation on ground. With that said, I'd like to begin my presentation with a brief situationer of the Philippine media. The Philippines has one of the freest, most vibrant, most rambunctious press in the region and perhaps also in Asia. This is partly because protections to press freedom are enshrined in our Constitution and even dating back to our old charter. However, while we report in freedom, we also report in fear. We're living in both freedom and fear because threats to Filipino journalists come in many forms. In the Philippines, and I say this with great consideration for other countries as well, unlike other democracies in Asia, we still don't have a Freedom of Information law as well as a Whistleblower Protection Act. So it has made our job harder because it's hard for us to get information. Apart from legal challenges, there is also great impunity. While it is one of the freest, the Philippines is also one of the most dangerous places for journalists. Since 1986, 152 journalists have been killed in the line of duty, and the stories that they were doing before their death were stories on local crime and corruption. The Committee to Protect Journalists ranks us just behind Syria and Iraq as the countries with the most number of journalist deaths. However, as journalists, of course, we persevere. We survive and even thrive. For almost 3 decades now, in the case of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, the center founded by Sheila Coronel has covered or uncovered stories of corruption, irregularities, wrongdoing. We have investigated the wealth of the presidents as well as several other accountability issues in education, health, and the environment. More than 5 years ago, we investigated the wealth of the Arroyo family, our former president, and about 16 years ago, PCIJ also came out with its investigation on the unexplained wealth of former President Joseph Estrada. The PCIJ uncovered the millions, mistresses, and mansions of former President Estrada, and the stories became cornerstone of the impeachment charges filed against the former president. Estrada was convicted of plunder. So I'm drawing lessons from these stories that the center has done over the years, taking into account our context in the country. So first of all, I'd like to point out again, going back to my what I earlier said about access to information. Of course, this is not new, and I understand that other countries are also undergoing the same problem as well. When information access tends to be limited, arbitrary, and expensive, that doesn't mean we have to stop. In the case of the Philippines, PCIJ, we take advantage of available records, but of course, we do not lose sight of our right to demand for fuller access. In the case of the Estrada story, back then, the Securities and Exchange Commission, it didn't have an online repository yet, so we have to go to the office. The PCIJ researchers then had to go to the office, spend 5 to 6 hours, and just be able to get the maximum of 3 records. So they did that for 3 months in order to complete all of the corporate records that form the backbone for the Estrada story. So the corporate records were very helpful because it helped the center unmask the frontmen and shell companies that Estrada created for his secret acquisitions of real property. And because of that, we realized the value of documents. So even before then, it has been a practice at PCIJ to get more and more documents. So not only because we are doing a particular story, but it has just become a practice for us to get asset records, election reports. So in the last 2 to 3 years, we've started digitizing our records and made them public online. So in a way, it's also a way for us to widen access to information. Second, corruption stories can get very complicated. And in our case, while we are not dismissing other findings, we try to aim for what can be documented and, of course, identify conflict of interests and look for gaps in law and procedure. One of the stories that we came out with the story on Arroyo Wealth, it's a story about there was a year when, in 2010, former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, her wealth registered a sudden increase, and it was because of a sale of a land. So we looked into the sale of this land and found out that the land was sold at a time when land prices have gone down. So we looked into it. We were looking at that and also maybe the capacity of the buyer to make such purchase. But apart from that, we went to the property and found out that the caretaker of the property is also employed with the local mayor. So we also tried to look at the political angle, and also in the course of getting more information, we found out that more public works funds or more road projects were poured into this particular area, and particularly on the roads leading to that particular lot. So while also coming up or presenting other findings, we tried to focus more on where public interest lies. So we tried to focus on that because we think it's also very important for us to be able to explain to our readers, to taxpayers, why this story should matter to them. Okay. Next. When there are possible legal threats, libel is a criminal offense in the Philippines. And in 2012, we passed the Cybercrime Prevention Act, where there are higher penalties for online libel. So if you are convicted for online libel, that's 12 years imprisonment, double than the penalty for libel offline. So what we always try to say is the best defense is good and accurate reporting. Of course, multiple sources, discipline of verification, go to field, see for yourself, and also seek help. We're not lawyers, we're not accountants, so we try to get expert advice also to help us better understand, especially a very complicated issue. Okay, 2 more slides. Emphasizing the consequences of corruption, humanizing stories, and also being transparent on how we do our work are things that we have always tried to do. But I think these are things that we need to do more of now, especially in the age of social media. Especially in the Philippines, there is an emerging issue about how there's a lot of distrust in journalists, especially on Facebook. Especially now, you might have heard about the news about our tough-talking President Duterte. And at an age where feelings of truth tend to overpower hard facts, I think we need to work harder to really be able to help our readers understand why our stories are important. And finally, former President Estrada was convicted, but he was pardoned by Arroyo. In 2010, he ran for president and almost won. In 2013, he became Manila mayor, and just a few months ago, he was elected again. Former President Arroyo, she filed a plea before the Supreme Court to drop the case against her, and the Supreme Court acquitted her. So now she's representative in our Congress. So when you have former presidents like Estrada and Arroyo get re-elected, what do we do? I don't really have a lot of answers, but perhaps you might also have. But I guess I guess I am ending my presentation on a negative note, but we'd like to see it as a challenge. We have to stay with the story and really work harder, innovate, nurture the culture for investigative reporting, and maybe even help create gain back the public goodwill for investigative reporting. Thank you.
Okay. So I always amazed when I hear story about how PCIJ spending 3 months every day going to the research to the record office, getting only 5 to 6 records every time they went there, until they can compile this huge database of corporation records belong to Estrada. So if you in your own country you don't have a good public records and open government system, what PCIJ has done, I think, can be a good example. Okay, so let's move on to the third panelist. We have Siva Gonle from CIJ Nepal. He also going to share stories about how Nepalis investigate corruption.
Thank you. Sorry for your inconvenience. My presentation is in Nepali, so my colleagues, Anuragji, will make this in English. Hello. धन्यवाद. म खोज पत्रकारिता केन्द्रको सम्पादकको रूपमा आफूले यो इन्भेस्टिगेटिभ स्टोरीहरू, खास गरी करप्सनको विषयमा इन्भेस्टिगेटिभ स्टोरीहरू गर्दाखेरिको अनुभव र त्यस क्रममा सिकेका पाठहरू केही उदाहरणको रूपमा उदाहरणसहित तपाईहरु समक्ष चाहिँ प्रस्तुत गर्न गइरहेको छु.
Shivaji is going to share the experiences and the lessons learned as a journalist, as a career journalist, and as an editor at CIJ.
यो तपाईहरुलाई देखाइरहेको यो अहिले पावर पोइन्टमा देखिरहेको कुरा नेपालका दुईटा यस्ता घटनासँग सम्बन्धित छ जहाँ दुई ठाउँमा युथहरू संलग्न छन्. एउटा युवा स्वरोजगार कोषको कार्यक्रममा कसरी त्यो कोषलाई मिसयुज गरिएको छ र त्यो कोष चाहिँ कसरी राजनीतिक वा अरू व्यक्तिगत स्वार्थका निम्ति प्रयोग गरिराखिएको छ भन्ने कुराको एक्जाम्पल छ भने, दोस्रो चाहिँ त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालय नेपालको युनिभर्सिटीमा थेसिस कसरी सजिलैसँग किनबेच गर्न पाइन्छ र यो एकदमै सस्तो कारोबारको विषय छ भन्ने कुरा योसँग सम्बन्धित छ.
So there are two illustrations that you see over there. They are illustrations from two separate stories that CIJ did. The first one is the story about how the youth self-employment fund, because we have a lot of unemployment problem in the country and people don't have sufficient money to start a business, so the government came up with this fund to support youths of this country to do a self-employment business. But there was massive corruption in the self-employment fund, which CIJ was able to expose. And the second illustration is about, it's a recent story that we did, where we exposed how the dissertations and theses in Nepal's one of the oldest and prestigious university are actually plagiarized, with the nexus between the bookshop owners, the professors, and the middlemen, the brokers who sell them to the students.
र यसको नेपालको इन्भेस्टिगेटिभ जर्नलिजममा यसको क्लियर एउटा स्पष्ट संकेत पनि के हो भने, खोज पत्रकारितालाई नेपालको यो जुन आउने दिनमा पनि यसका लागि चाहिँ हामीले एउटा बलियो तयारी गरेर जानुपर्छ, किनभने यो चाँडै सकिने वा सजिलैसँग के अरे यसको निराकरण हुने अवस्था देखिँदैन.
So the massive amount of money involved in these corruption is actually a lesson for Nepali journalists and journalists who are watching Nepal, that corruption in Nepal is not just visible. There are also other underlying layers of corruption that are not direct visible. There are levels of other forms of moral corruption that encourage these kind of things from happening. So it's not something easy and visible. So journalists need to probe deeper to expose these.
अब म तपाईहरुलाई अर्को एउटा एक्जाम्पलबाट सुरु गर्छु र यो घटना भनेको चाहिँ नेपाल प्रधान सेनापतिले आफ्नोलाई सर्वोच्च पदमा पुग्नका लागि कसरी आफ्नो जन्ममिति सच्याए भन्नेसँग सम्बन्धित छ.
So the next story that we are talking about just gives us an impression about the level of corruption, the amount of corruption and the condition of the corruption in Nepal. This is a story about Nepal's army chief who forged his birth record to stay in power longer, just a little longer. So you can see there the name in the red box is his name, and there where I'm pointing is his birth record that he has manually forged. The birth date was brought a year less so that he could stay 1 year more in power.
यो इन्फर्मेसन जब हामीले म यसबाट हामीले सिकेको पाठको कुरा गर्न गइरहेको छु। यो इन्फर्मेसन जब हामीले विशेष सूत्रबाट थाहा पायौं यसलाई प्रमाणित गर्न चाहिँ सजिलो थिएन। त्यसैले हामीले यसलाई खोज्नका निम्ति हामीले यसको क्लु चाहिँ कसरी फेला पार्यौं भन्दाखेरि यसका प्रधान सेनापतिहरूको जन्ममिति उल्लेख हुने भए पनि नेपाली सेनाले राखेको वेब पेजमा वर्तमान प्रधान सेनापतिको बारेमा कुनै जन्ममिति उल्लेख थिएन। त्यसैले यसलाई खोज्दै जाँदाखेरि हामीले के सिक्यौं भने खोज पत्रकारले थोरै पनि असामान्य कुरालाई व्यवस्था गर्नुहुन्न। जन्ममिति लुकाइएको विषयलाई शंकाको घेरामा राखेपछि हाम्रो अनुसन्धानको प्रक्रिया अगाडि बढ्यो।
It's very interesting how we got to this story, because earlier we realized while following Nepal Army's website, most of the earlier army chief had clearly mentioned their year of birth as well as the date of their birth in the army website. But we realized that this present army chief had only mentioned the year of his birth and not the month. Here I have to remind you that Nepali calendar and English calendar, there are some difference in the months. So taking advantage of that, the impression was given that by just mentioning the year, he was trying to hide the Nepali birth date and the month of birth that he had. He was actually it was officially on the record. So which meant that he could not he would have to retire much later after this year was mentioned.
र खोज पत्रकारले थोरै पनि असामान्य कुरालाई व्यवस्था गर्नुहुन्न भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ हामीले योबाट सिक्यौं.
And the lesson that we learned from this story is that if journalists just minutely look at the information, and if we hadn't noticed that the month and the date of the year was missing, then we would not have got to this story. The lesson is just look at things very minutely and notice anything out of place.
तर सँगसँगै हामीले यसबाट अर्को पनि पाठ सिक्यौं. सार्वजनिक पदमा भएको व्यक्तिको अभिलेख चाहिँ एक भन्दा बढी ठाउँमा हुने गर्छ. त्यसैले यदि समाचार स्रोतलाई विश्वासमा लिएर चाहिँ इन्भेस्टिगेसन अगाडि बढाउन सक्यो भने चुनौती ठानिएका ठाउँमा पनि सूचना प्राप्त गर्न सकिन्छ. हामीले उनको जन्ममितिको रेकर्ड देखिने तस्बिर नै खिचेर ल्याउन सफल भयौं.
Whereas the institution, big institutions like army is something that the institution which is very secretive. The best part about investigating a public figure or a public institution is there are a lot of paper trails. And like everywhere in Nepal also, the record of public officials or the people involved in public institutions are kept at more than one places. So when we followed the paper trail, we found out the discrepancy in the birth year and the birth month and the date of birth in more than one places. That's how we were able to get this record. And we took a snapshot of this register from the school record.
Next one. यस्तै हामीसँग अर्को एउटा अभिलेख छ जुन चाहिँ नेपालको सर्वोच्च अदालतका न्यायाधीशले आफू 55 दिन मात्रै प्रधान न्यायाधीश पदमा बस्न पाउने अवस्था हुँदाखेरि आफ्नो नागरिकताको प्रतिलिपि कसरी सच्याएर त्यसलाई 11 महिना सो पदमा बस्नका निम्ति योग्य बनाउनलाई त्यो डकुमेन्ट करेक्सन गरे, डकुमेन्ट सच्याए भन्ने कुरासँग सम्बन्धित छ.
So another, it's almost the follow-up of the story that we did earlier, and this one is about the Supreme Court judge. Again, this person also forged his birth record, while the original birth record would have allowed him to stay as a Supreme Court judge only for 55 days. By forging this date of birth, we calculated. And this is not a sitting Supreme Court Chief Justice. He's a Supreme Court judge. Now he's in line for becoming a Chief Justice. And now with these forged record, he will be a Chief Justice for 11 months, not 55 days. So this is something that we were able to notice. So if you see this is the area where the birth record has been marked, and that is the area where it has been forged. So Yes, this is almost a follow-up of the last story.
नेपालमा अदालत हतपति पत्रकारहरूले समाचार लेख्नका लागि चासो नदिने क्षेत्रमध्येमै पर्छ र त्यहाँ पनि अदालतसँग सम्बन्धित डकुमेन्टहरूलाई मसिनो गरी केलाएर हेर्ने हो भने र त्यहाँ भएका दस्तावेजहरूलाई र ती आदेशहरूलाई ती फैसलाहरूलाई चाहिँ मसिनो गरी केलाउने हो भने अदालतका प्रधान न्यायाधीश अथवा त्यस्ता पब्लिक अथोरिटीलाई पनि बलियोसँग प्रश्न गर्न सकिन्छ। उनीहरूले कन्टेम्प अफ कोर्ट वा अरू कुरा अगाडि सारेर चाहिँ पत्रकारहरूमाथि प्रश्न उठाउन सक्दैनन् भन्ने हाम्रो यो अर्को एउटा स्टोरी हो।
Like in many parts of the world, even in Nepal, journalists are very careful while they are doing stories on institution of judiciary, because there is a fear about contempt of court that might be charged on them. So there is a slight hesitation over there as well. But over the years, the stories that we've done on judiciary and the corruption over there, the one lesson that we learned was, if we have all the documents available and if we have verified information, then journalists do not need to hesitate. Story is a story. They don't need to fear the laws. Laws are there for protection. They are not there for, discouraging reporting. So this is one of the stories that we did about, and that person who is, examining the person, the patient is not a doctor. He is actually a person, pretending to be a doctor. We exposed his certificate that he's a real doctor.
योबाट हामीले यो स्टोरीबाट हामीले सिकेको पाठ भनेको सुप्रिम कोर्टको इस्युमा पनि आधार प्रमाण सहित व्यवस्थित गरेर बलियोसँग चाहिँ समाचार लेख्यो भने कन्टेम्प अफ कोर्ट लगायतका कुराहरू अगाडि बढ्न सक्दैनन् भन्ने कुरा अगाडिको उसमा मैले शेयर गरेँ। र अब यसपछिको हाम्रो स्टोरीको विषय छ, यो हेर्दा सामान्य लाग्ने कुरालाई पनि हामीले व्यवस्था नगरिकन अनुसन्धान गर्न थाल्यौँ भने खोज पत्रकारले ठुल्ठुला स्टोरीहरू फेला पार्न सक्दो रहेछ। नेपालका अस्पतालहरू किन यति विघ्न अस्तव्यस्त छन् भनेर निहाल्दै जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ हामीले नेपालमा नेपालको मेडिकल क्षेत्र चाहिँ कसरी माफियाहरूको कब्जामा परिसकेको रहेछ भन्ने कुरा पत्ता लगायौँ।
The term that we use in Nepal to describe corruption in Nepal's medical sector is the term medical mafia that we use for brokers and people who corrupt the Nepal's medical sector. And as the illustration shows there, Nepal's medical sector is in deep trouble because these private medical colleges and their agents bribe the people in the regulatory bodies like medical council to manipulate and bypass government laws and regulations for operating medical colleges, because of which the medical practitioners that graduate are not of quality, because they don't get sufficient hours of study, they don't get good labs for preparation and studying, and there aren't good faculties over there to train them. So these are the kind of nexus that we exposed in the story.
Yeah. Next one. पत्रकारले सानो र ठुलो भनेर समाचार हेर्नु हुँदैन भन्ने एउटा स्टोरी हामीले हाम्रो अनुभवबाट भेटेका छौँ। यो नेपालको सुदूरपश्चिमको एउटा जिल्लामा भएको स्टोरी हो। एम्बुलेन्स किन्नका लागि पैसा निकासा गरियो, तर 4 वर्षपछि हेर्दा एम्बुलेन्स पेपरमा मात्रै रहेछ, एम्बुलेन्स किनेकै रहेनछ। हामीले यो स्टोरीलाई यसरी सार्वजनिक गरेका थियौँ।
And finally, we want to tell that there is never a small story or a big story. The story that we did over here is the people are being carried down in stretcher. These are the people from a rural hospital being transferred to a bigger hospital, and there was a donation of ambulance to this hospital, but the ambulance only existed in paper, which means the people who were responsible to deliver the ambulance had actually taken the money and not delivered the ambulance. So we were able to expose that the ambulance only existed in paper. Hence the corruption was exposed. And while we were doing this story, the good thing happened was the person got the whiff of that journalist was on this story and immediately returned that money into government's account. So even while the story was being investigated, the impact was already there.
Okay, finally I have one example. यो मेडिकल सेक्टरमा चाहिँ तुरुन्तै डकुमेन्टहरू करेक्सन गरेर नेपालीलाई भारतीय र भारतीयलाई नेपाली बनाएर चाहिँ कसरी एडमिसन गराइन्छ र त्यसको आधारमा चाहिँ विदेशी विद्यार्थीहरूबाट बढी पैसा लिइन्छ नेपालको मेडिकल कलेज सेक्टरको भन्ने कुराको एक्जाम्पल हो। यो दुई थरीका उदाहरणहरू छन्।
Again, very quickly and repeatedly, Nepal's medical sector is in deep trouble. These students are Nepalis, as their citizenship certificate below suggests. But look at the documents below. It suggests that they are an Indian citizens. Both cannot be true. We found out that medical colleges encourage these students and their parents to obtain a fake Indian citizenship so that they could get enrolled in Nepal's medical colleges without giving entrance exam, which means we have a underqualified entrants in Nepal medical sector. Ultimately, they are the ones who are going to graduate and become doctors. So this was the story that we were able to expose and tell how unqualified doctors are produced in Nepal, and giving an idea about overall problem in Nepal's medical sector.
Okay.
So there are more examples like this, but due to shortage of time, we cannot present it all. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Siva. So I guess the thread that really binds all of the three panelists' stories is how corruption are really linked to how the public receive less services from the government because there's a widespread corruption. I'd like to just briefly give you a little bit of lesson learned from Indonesia context. Let's start from the beginning. I think Carol has mentioned the importance of paper trail, building your own database when public records are not available as a database, as structured information. And Claire mentioned about the need to keep asking questions and the importance of building your records as an investigative journalist so people can know who to find if they have stories that might interest you. And our colleague from Nepal explained the paper trail. Let me briefly give you an example of how we in Indonesia cultivate our sources. Next slide, please. So this is Ratu Atut Kosia. She's a governor in Banten, a nearby province from Jakarta. She was involved in a big corruption case 2 years ago. And the method that we used to expose her corruption was through her spending spree. Next slide, please. So we got this records from her credit card company. So we have received leaks from people who work in a credit card company that can really elaborate on how she spent her money abroad. So she usually spend 1 or 2 weeks every year to go to Europe and spend some money in big chain stores, buying purses, buying jewelry. And by exposing that spending spree, we can then link the public scandal, the public scam that happened in her region with the money being spent upon. So it's important to, if you want to link, say if you have a story at hand, you have a source telling you that there's been a markup in a public project, for instance, and you want to link the money stolen from that public project with certain public officials. The easiest way to do that is look at the public record showing assets owned by that public officials. And if there is a discrepancy between what they supposed to earn from their salary with what they actually own in land, in assets, in buildings, or how they spend that money, that can open up a lot of questions. So looking at public records about asset declarations, audit report from state auditor agency, also a good place to start with, and companies ownership data. Usually if you look at those and link that to your public officials, you can find a lot of stories to begin with. And the other important part is cultivating your sources. Really find people that have stories from inside. I think Claire also mentioned that one MDB story will not ever be completed without some insider information, because whistleblowers are out there, and they're waiting for us if we can just know where to find them. This is Agus Chondro. He's an MP from Indonesia. He exposed a big bribery scheme back in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, because he was disappointed when his party chose another candidate for a local election. He wants his wife to be the candidate, but the party chose another candidate, and he was really disappointed, and that's why he spilled the beans and exposed the story. So who you want as sources? People that has motives, people that want a revenge sometimes can be a good source, but make sure that they have access to quality information. Having access per se is not enough, but having people that have quality information, people that have the first-hand source, not only people who has hearsay information, gossips about what happened in faraway in high places, but really people with access to the quality information. But again, I think all of the panelists also emphasize the importance of security, and the importance of anticipating the consequences. This is one of our sources. He ended up in jail because he exposed a story of big tax evasion scandal. One of the important things to remember is that you have to stay with your source even after your story being published. You are responsible to what happened to them. So after this happened, after Vincent was thrown to jail, we start a campaign to release him, because we believe he is a justice collaborator. And because of that effort, finally the government came in, and he was released from jail 2 years ago. So they are everywhere, the whistleblowers. They are people who has failed business corporation, maybe have some stories to tell, dissatisfied workers, NGOs and CSOs. They are the ones who are on the ground, and they have many research that can link to corruption cases, opposition parties, and law enforcement agencies. Maybe we are disappointed with our police force, for instance, but believe me, there are good police out there, and they are willing to, if you know them, if you make yourself visible enough, they will know who to get in touch with, and they will come up with stories about how their colleague failed to finish a case, or receiving bribes for not pursuing a case, and things like that. Okay, so that's all from me. Let's start with the Q&A. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. There's one over there in the back, and two, the woman with the hijab, and three. Let's start with 3 questions first. Frederick, you can go first.
Hi all, I'm Frederick Lorin. I said hello in the other room. I'm from Sweden, from Swedish television, from a very small investigative unit. But we need to do international stories, and as I said in there, we need you guys to cooperate. One of the things that I would like to ask you here at this panel is to join with me people who have knowledge from Nepal and from Malaysia in a small working group, because one of our biggest companies, the TeliaSonera telecom company, Europe's 5th largest, they have expanded widely into Eurasia, into Uzbekistan, to Azerbaijan, and also to Nepal. But we uncovered some 5 years ago how that was a totally corrupt expansion, and how they paid bribes in, at least we proved, two countries. Now they are running away from all these markets, and last week they agreed with the American authorities that they would pay a record fine of $1.5 billion for bribing just in Uzbekistan. We are pretty sure that they have been bribing in all of their 6 markets, and also in Nepal. What I'm suggesting is that, what I will do is I've already formed a little working group on the encrypted service Signal called NCell. That is the company here in Nepal that Telia used to own. And I've also formed a folder in my cloud that I will share with you. And my idea is that I know everything about TeliaSonera. I know all the annual reports in Swedish. I have the sources in Sweden. But I don't know any Nepalese. talked to Dixit, Kunda Dixit, about cooperating on this, but we never got around to it. But now is the time. And here are you guys from Nepal, but also guys from Malaysia, which is very interesting because they are corrupting each other. They are paying bribes. We know that. We just need to prove how. And I think we can do it with the local Malaysian knowledge, local Nepalese knowledge, and the local Swedish knowledge. We can do it. We don't need to share sources. We don't need to totally trust each other. If I share the annual reports from Sweden in the group, you share from Malaysia and from Nepal in a language that I can understand, that's good enough. That's a very good start.
Okay.
So I'll be down by the reception after this panel, and I will give the logins to those two things for everybody who's interested in the NCEL cooperation.
Okay. Very interesting offer from Frederick. If I can also remind everyone, but we will have some breakout session where networking like this can also be initiated. Anyone with stories idea and networking ideas can also join in. Okay, we have the second question over there, the lady with the hijab, and then there with the brown hijab.
Hello. I'm Nani from Sina Project, based in Malaysia. I would like to applaud Clara for your amazing work. You're inspired us to dig also about 1MDB. So thank you for that. And I have some question for Carol. Recently, Duterte signed EO on FOI, so it's really shocking coming from him. So I would like to know, is this FOI will be in place at a national level, and what PCIJ plan to actually measure the effectiveness of the implementation of FOI in Philippines?
Okay, we have another question, then we can answer it. This one in front, yes.
It's a lot of work that people like you and perhaps us do is also for our readers and our audiences. And somehow in this narrative, we didn't perhaps touch much about how your readers or your listeners or your viewers reacted to your stories, because they are a very big support system. When you write for audiences. So how did the people who read your work or followed your work, how did they react? Was there a lot of support coming from them? Because that kind of energizes people, like you who work in these areas, especially when you were literally living in exile in England.
Let's have one more. The woman with the hijab, yes.
Quick question to you. How did you manage to get credit card companies to leak credit card accounts of the governor?
The credit card, okay.
Nadia from Jordan, Arij. I just want to ask Shiva, are your investigations translated in English? Because maybe as from other countries, the Nepali president, not very interesting to us, but the techniques you did, the investigation is very important to us to see how you do it, especially in the health sector.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have 3 questions. Let's start with Claire. There's several questions for you.
Sorry, thank you. I've had an amazing response and huge amount of support in Malaysia. And I'll admit, when I started on this project, I was focusing on environmental issues in Sarawak, and I guess it just led me, as someone with an investigative reporting background, it led me into this 1MDB story, which is what has really sort of communicated with wide. I suppose that we've been on a bit of a journey because other news outlets haven't been able to perhaps adopt the challenging tone that I'm able to do, and to name people in the way I do, and to be kind of directly critical if you have the information with which to be critical. There's been quite a huge response. I mean, people really like to read, about almost inaccessible and powerful people actually, being brought down to size, being exposed. I mean, everyone likes that, and I've traded on that, and I've also attempted really to communicate a little bit of, perhaps a more challenging, disrespectful style. I've done it deliberately because, there's so much deference within the culture of the Malaysian media by necessity that I've deliberately been non-deferential and perhaps more trenchant than I would normally be, in order just to communicate, that's our job. We're not here to be polite. Of course, we wouldn't be rude, but we're not here to be deferential. And people love it, actually, generally. I mean, I have had some criticisms, but people like to see the newspaper standing up to power.
President Duterte's EO is a welcome development for us. Actually, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism was consulted in the crafting of that EO. But I guess I would like to point out that the EO, it's still a moving picture because they're still drafting the list of exceptions. And they have a long list of exceptions. So that is something that we are trying to monitor, because otherwise then the EO would be a watered-down version of what they were trying to achieve with that particular EO. Secondly, PCIJ is a member of the Right to Know Right Now Coalition, which is a group in the Philippines that has tried for many years, maybe almost 2 decades now, to push for the passage of the Freedom of Information Law. So what we're doing now, apart from, of course, you have the EO, but it's just covering the executive, so not covering legislative and the judiciary. So that's why I say, while information access is limited, it all tends to be arbitrary. So who's in power depends on who's in power, how open access is. So right now, PCIJ is working with the network. So apart from pushing for a law, we're also working with community groups to help them request for information, test not just the EO, but also access to information provisions that are available in other laws in the Philippines. So we're trying to do that so that perhaps if ever we get to that point that a law is very possible, it will be more attuned to the needs of the citizens. Measure the effectiveness. I guess there are various ways of measuring it, because again, it depends on the needs of a community. So for instance, while we are talking a lot about technology, but for example, in a small community, they don't have access to internet. So maybe a requirement for information to be available online might not be the best solution for that particular community. And again, we go back to hard documents. So again, it depends on the needs of the community.
सिआइजे नेपालले मूलधारमा र फ्रिलान्सिङ रूपमा काम गरिरहने पत्रकारहरूसँग मिलेर यो इन्भेस्टिगेटिभ कन्टेन्ट प्रड्युस गर्छ र त्यो चाहिँ हामी मूलतः हामी नेपालीमा त्यो कन्टेन्ट प्रड्युस गर्छौं र त्यसलाई अंग्रेजीमा ट्रान्सलेट गरेर हाम्रो वेबसाइटमा राख्छौं.
Since there was query about CIJ's investigative reports, we work with freelancers and journalists who work with the media houses, but we are an independent non-profit organization, so most of our stories are either published in the mainstream newspaper dailies or print media, or they are also put in our website, mostly in Nepali, but we get them translated and put them in English as well.
Okay, for the last questions about how do we get the credit card records, I think it's a matter of knowing who has that information and knowing how to approach that guy. Of course, you cannot advertise to everyone that you are doing a story on that. In our case, it's sometimes also down to luck, because one of the guys that work on that story has long-time sources that work in the credit card company. Of course, it's an illegal way of getting the data, but we find ways around it and make it more accessible to the public. Okay, we still have a couple of questions. I think we have 5 minutes left. One question from the middle, and 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's do 3's question.
Hi Claire, apa kabar? Nama saya Joanna. Saya tinggal di Mount Kiara, Kuala Lumpur. But before that, I lived in Dubai for a year. But was curious, how did you make the connection between the United Arab Emirates and 1MDB? Was it a paper trail or was it a source? And also, do you have any lessons learned, any tips, anything you would do differently in the reporting of 1MDB?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in the front.
Hi, Claire, this is a question for you. This is an extension of the question what he asked. You talked about the readers. I would like to know about the civil society members in Malaysia. How strong they are. Can they force the Prime Minister to step down?
Can I just ask again, what rules?
Sorry?
I didn't hear.
This is a question for you. This is an extension of the question what he asked. You talked about the readers, how engaging they are. But I would like to know about the civil society members. How strong is the civil society? Can they really force the Prime Minister to step down? Thank you.
Okay, and last for this session, this gentleman, please.
Hi, this is Jean-Jacques from Germany. I would like to ask from your experience, how during and after an investigation do you protect and prepare to protect your sources?
That's the sort of classic progression. It was public that there was a joint venture between 1MDB and this Abu Dhabi organization, IPIC Abar. And so there were press conferences, press releases, strategic alliances were talked about, and then sort of things went a bit quiet. A lot of money, it was acknowledged, was raised by Malaysia, but then the questions started to be asked about where the money had gone. There's a very large building site that stood empty in central Kuala Lumpur, which was supposed to be the location for a major business district with sort of, great financial center of Southeast Asia was supposed to emerge, and it never did. So that was the public questioning that you start to probe. The private, the rest of the story, emerged as I dug and I made contact with sources. You have the public questions, you have the public probing, and then you start to get the information that comes in. So it's that natural progression. Civil society is great in Malaysia. There are some amazing organizations that have, really do keep, they focus on the principles of human rights, freedom of the individual, and they're having a very tough time at the moment because the government's cracking down very heavily on people who are basically just upholding universal principles. It's become a dangerous occupation in Malaysia, and indeed there's yet another peaceful civil society march planned for next month. These people who are always peaceful, always extremely well disciplined, they will have a very difficult time and they will be prosecuted legally. It's an abuse of power against civil society, and it's a real struggle at the moment in Malaysia.
What will you do differently? What will you do differently? Is there a lesson learned that you have?
Maybe tapping into the final question that I received in terms of doing differently. I'm an individual journalist. I'm not protected by lawyers or any finance or editors or people that can give me computer advice. So it's been quite a challenge to take on a story of this magnitude effectively as a single operator. And I have had, I was perhaps insufficiently prepared to deal with the level of hacking, surveillance, and indeed, a state very anxious indeed to find out who my sources were. If I'd really thought what I was walking into such a big story, and if I'd known that in advance just how big it was going to get and just how dirty it was going to get, because I come from a background where if you find out something embarrassing about a prime minister, well done, you get a pat on the back in the British media, and the prime minister steps down immediately. You're not. I don't come from a culture where you've got a guy hanging on in the way that the guy in Malaysia is hanging on. He's not going to resign. He's going to fight to the end, and he's fighting very dirty. And this has left me, not perhaps able. I mean, in fact, the sources I mentioned who have both come into trouble over 1MDB, I don't think that was actually to do with my interfacing. Both of those sources were known to their colleagues as people who were likely to have spoken to me. So it was not my interchanges with them that exposed them, unfortunately. Sources, and I have very many sources on this story now, and most remain anonymous. Sources are sacred. Okay. You treat them with enormous respect.
Thank you, Claire. Carol, about protecting sources, do you want to add something on it? How to protect your sources?
Of course, when we have a source and we promised anonymity, that is something that we have to keep. So whatever happens, we have to keep their anonymity.
Siva, anything to add on protecting your source?
यो समाचार स्रोतको रक्षाको कुरामा खास गरी नेपाल जस्तो देशमा चाहिँ दुई तीनवटा तरिकाहरू हामीले अवलम्बन गर्ने गरेका छौँ। एउटा चाहिँ त्यो समाचार एकभन्दा बढी ठाउँमा त्यो समाचारका स्रोतहरू कहाँ समाचार कुन कुन ठाउँबाट पाइन सकिन्छ भन्ने कुराको बारेमा अनुसन्धान गरिसकेपछि त्यो समाचार एकभन्दा बढी ठाउँबाट प्राप्त गर्न सकिने त्यो सूचना एकभन्दा बढी ठाउँबाट प्राप्त गर्न सकिने अवस्था छ भने त्यो तुलनात्मक रूपमा कम जोखिमयुक्त हुने ठाउँबाट त्यस्तो सूचना प्राप्त गर्ने हामीले अघि भर्खरै देखाएको एउटा जुन त्यो न्यायाधीशको जन्ममिति हेरफेर गरेको प्रमाण सङ्कलन गर्दा त्यो न्यायाधीशको जन्ममिति हेरफेर गरिएको डकुमेन्ट चाहिँ कहाँ हुन्छ भनेर खोज्ने क्रममा बडो कसैले अनुमानै नगर्ने ठाउँबाट हामीले त्यो जन्ममिति प्राप्त गर्न सक्यौँ। त्यसले गर्दा समाचारको स्रोतको रक्षा, समाचार कहाँबाट निकाल्ने भन्ने कुरासँग चाहिँ एकभन्दा बढी ठाउँबाट त्यो सूचना पाइने अवस्था छ भने त्यो ठाउँको एउटा र दोस्रो समाचार स्रोतको बारेमा जसले आफूलाई त्यो इन्फर्मेसन दिएको छ, जसले आफूलाई आफ्नो जो न्युज सोर्स छ त्यो न्युज सोर्सले आफूलाई सेयरिङ गरेको समाचारबाट त्यही न्युज सोर्सले त्यो समाचार दिएको हो भन्ने नबुझिने गरी पनि समाचार प्रस्तुत गर्ने केही कला हुन सक्छ। त्यो विधि एउटा इन्भेस्टिगेटिभ जर्नलिस्टले त्यो विधि अवलम्बन गर्न सक्छ।
About protecting the sources, it really depends upon whether the information that you are presenting in your story can be obtained from more than one or two sources. If they are available or they are obtainable from more than one sources, then your sources are relatively protected because the authorities don't know where you have sourced the information from. But in cases where the authorities can explicitly know where you are sourcing that information from, then you might need to formulate your story or present it in a certain way that your sources don't get exposed. In one of the story that we did about the Supreme Court judge or the Nepal Army chief, manipulating their ages, their birth dates, we were very lucky because, like we said, there are a lot of paper trails for public officials, being posted. So over the years, their public records are left in different places. So we are able to source it from one of those places and then present it without having to worry about our source being into trouble. So it really depends on the sources.
Thank you, Siva. I think last from me is sometimes we got neglect, we got really sloppy in the way we contact our sources, and in a digital age like this, I think that's something that is inexcusable. We need to be really careful when you send emails to your sources, even when you set up meetings, where to meet, when to meet. This is sometimes something that that we tend to forget, because we tend to only focus on protecting the resource after we publish the story, not naming them in our article, for instance. But nowadays, with surveillance, digital surveillance and all, I think it's very important to be really careful from the beginning, from when we set up the meeting with our sources. And there's plenty of sessions throughout this conference that talk about digital security. Please do find time to attend one of them. And I guess that's all the time we have for. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you guys can take away things that are important for your future works. And big applause for our three panelists. And we'll see each other soon. Thank you. Thank you so much.